Hi, my name is Becky Lindstrom. I'm a life coach, teacher, and writer. And in this video, I'll be offering you some new perspectives that will help you reduce stress in your life. If you have any questions at any time after the video, you can visit my website, everpresentlife.com. And to give you a little more information about myself, I have a Bachelor of Science in Meteorology and a Master of Science in Education, both from Purdue University. I also have a decade of experience living with and managing my own anxiety. And it was this journey that took me in a new career direction about 5 years ago when I decided to go back to school to get my life coaching certification through UC Davis. And so now my job is to help stressed out people turn their fears into fulfillment. In this video, I'll be answering the following questions. What is stress? How is it generated in your body? How can you manage it more effectively? Where does it originate in your mind? And most importantly, how can you reduce it? And when I say stress, I'm referring to 3 types of stress. There's acute stress, which happens once in a while or maybe even once in a lifetime. And then there's periodic stress, which happens on occasion, maybe for a long period of time, but not every day. And then finally, there's chronic stress, which is the type of stress that doctors are most concerned about because it's the kind that can have the greatest impact on our overall health. And so anyone who is raising small children or caregiving for someone with a long-term illness, or if you yourself have a long-term illness, it's very likely that you experience chronic stress probably on a daily basis. And so in addition to these 3 types of stress, there are 2 primary sources of stress. And these include external sources like the people that are around us or the situations we find ourselves in, or maybe it's the conditions that we don't have any control over, since most of us did not choose our parents and very few of us have any control over what part of the world we're born in. There are also internal sources of stress like fear emotions like worry, fear, and guilt, or the perspectives that we hold that can often generate these emotions, the thoughts that we have, the motivations that drive us, or the beliefs that we hold. These are all kind of attributed to our own internal wiring, and some of us are more prone to worry or fear or feeling guilt than others. But overall, in general, there is one major source of stress that most of us don't like to really fully acknowledge, because recognizing it and acknowledging it can actually increase our stress level. And that is this, that we really have very little control over most of the things that happen to us in this world. We may be able to manage some of these things or manipulate them or influence them in some way. But ultimately, if the outcome is out of our control, this can become a tremendous source of stress for us. And so it's really important. One of the first perspective shifts I want to offer is to make sure that you're directing your energy where it will do you the most good. If you're putting a lot of energy into controlling things that are out of your control, that can be a waste of energy and actually increase your stress. A lot of times, though, we don't know what else to do. The only other option seems to be to focus on reducing stress, which is something we can try to do over the long term. But in the short term, when we're under stress, when we try to put our efforts into reducing that, we don't have a lot of luck. And there's a really important reason why. That's because we're putting our energy in the wrong place. So I want to talk a little bit about the human nervous system. We're just going to do a really brief overview. So within our body, in the autonomic nervous system, there are 3 parts that really play an important role in our management of stress. The enteric nervous system lines our entire digestive tract. I'm not going to actually talk about that today, although it is a fascinating subject. The parasympathetic nervous system is something you might actually know a fair bit about, even if you don't recognize that name. But where I really want to focus today is on the parasympathetic nervous system, because this is information that we just are not told, and it's something that all of us can benefit from. So the sympathetic nervous system is what we also refer to sometimes as the fight or flight tendency. When we are under stress or we are experiencing anxiety, our body tends to be very amped up. And this can result in, faster heartbeat, in breathing more quickly, getting more oxygen into our body. These are all things that happen when chemicals like adrenaline and dopamine are released, and they help us deal with challenging circumstances. But what we don't know necessarily is that there's also a counterbalance to this sympathetic nervous system in our body called the parasympathetic nervous system. And this is what controls those functions that our body does when we're in a state of relaxation. This includes digesting our food, falling asleep at night. These are all things that happen when we are relaxed, and so our body can release relaxation chemicals to promote these functions. And so it's really important to understand that, because instead of focusing on reducing stress, which once that adrenaline or dopamine has been released, there's no taking that back. But you can increase the levels of relaxation chemicals in your body, and that can help you balance your overall feelings of stress. And so there are 4 ways that you can actually engage your parasympathetic nervous system to help release more of these chemicals. The first is to do deep breathing, which is something, many of you have probably heard before, but what we don't hear is why this is important. So every time you inhale, your lungs open up the passageways inside your lungs, and that allows the oxygen to flow through. But that's not their actual resting state. The resting state for those passageways is closed. And so when you exhale, your body releases a relaxation chemical to close those passageways back up again. So if you can make your exhale twice as long as your inhale when you're deep breathing, you'll get twice as much of that relaxation chemical flowing through your body. And a second way that you can also release this chemicals is to relax your muscles by scanning your body from head to toe and noticing any places that you might be holding tension, and then consciously relaxing them. This is why mindfulness and meditation are suggested as good practices to help fight stress. This is because it promotes deep breathing and helps you relax your muscles, in addition to also relaxing your mind. And then there are other practices like yoga or Tai Chi, which can have all of the above benefits, because they allow you to, breathe more deeply, to learn how to control your muscles and relax them, and to also relax your mind at the same time. So it's important, again, to recognize that you can put your energy toward things that are going to be of benefit to you when you need to reduce stress in the short term. Another good thing to remember is that your focus determines your reality. And I know this quote is attributed to George Lucas, and yes, I found out that it's actually said by one of the characters in his movies, who happens to be a Jedi Knight, but the quote was really too good to pass up, because it just drives home a really important point. And this is that perspective is everything. There was a fascinating study done by Dr. Ellen Langer at Harvard University about 10 years ago, where she took a large group of hotel maids, and at the beginning of the study asked all of them how much exercise they got in their life. And all of the women said they didn't get any exercise. They were too busy. They had 2 jobs. They took care of their family at home when they went home at night. They just didn't have time for exercise. And so the researchers divided these women into 2 groups. The first group was told, we are just going to monitor some different health indices over the next 4 weeks: your heart rate, your blood pressure, your weight, your body mass index, and that was it. And then with the second group, these women were educated about how much exercise they were actually getting in their daily life when they were at work, about the number of calories they were burning every time they cleaned a bathroom or vacuumed or made a bed, about the muscle groups that got used, and how these were all really beneficial for them. And then they monitored their health indices, the same ones, over that 4-week period. And at the end of this study, when they compared the 2 groups, the results were pretty astounding. The group that had received the education about getting exercise, their blood pressure dropped by 10 points, and they lost on average 2 pounds. And this was after all other factors were controlled. So these women didn't change anything else in their daily life except for their perception. And that's really what the researchers came away with, the conclusion that exercise may actually affect our health in part or in whole because of the way that we perceive it, not necessarily just because of what we do, that there's a placebo effect involved. One of the graduate students on this study, Aaliyah Crum, went on to do her own research and eventually got her PhD, and she's now a professor at Stanford. Her conclusion from all of this is that I don't think we've given enough credit to the role of our beliefs in determining our reality. Does that sound familiar to you? Your focus determines your reality. So this has some really profound implications when it comes to stress. The old belief about stress is that it's bad for your health and you just need to do anything you can to avoid it. I'm sure we've all heard that at some time or another. The new belief about stress is that it's a natural response to the challenges you face and that your body is designed to handle it. And I cannot emphasize enough how important this information is. In fact, this shift in perspective right here could potentially change your life. It could save your life. A 29-year study of 7,000 British civil servants showed that of that group of people, they were asked 2 questions in this study. How much stress do you experience? And how do you perceive that stress? So those individuals who perceived that their stress affected their health a lot had a 50% greater chance of suffering a heart attack than those people who said they experienced a similar amount of stress but didn't perceive it to be as harmful. 50% is no small number. And there is a lot of other research that goes into why this may be. And there's a fascinating talk called How to Make Stress Your Friend by Dr. Kelly McGonigal. She's also at Stanford University. I would highly recommend it. If you search on the TED website or if you just search for the name of the talk, you'll pull it up and would definitely benefit from watching it. I'd like to go ahead and move on to something I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, which is that I want to help you not just manage your stress more effectively, but reduce it. And in order to do that, we need to take another perspective shift here, which is to consider not just where we put our focus, but where we live our life from. And this is my logo. I think it best represents what I'm trying to get at because it drives home this point through what's probably best described in a quote by Anne Morrow Lindbergh from her book Gift from the Sea. And the quote says, "This is an end toward which we could strive, to be the still axis within the revolving wheel of relationships, obligations, and activities." And I love this quote because I think it really drives home the point that life is going to continue to happen to us over and over again. We are going to have stress. There are things that are going to happen that we cannot control. But the one thing that we can control is where we live our life from. Do we live it from the edges where we're just constantly getting whirled around by the chaos? Or do we find a way to live from that still axis in the center where we are able to find some peace even in the middle of the chaos? And so the next perspective shift is to notice where your observations end and your story begins, and the effect that this can have on your stress. And so this is probably best explained through some pictures. I grew up here in northern Indiana, and it was pretty much a place of flat cornfields. And so after going out west a few times in college, I decided that I wanted to live in a place where there was topography. So after I graduated, I lived in California and then in Wyoming, New Mexico, back to California again. I spent some time in the Tetons. I have honestly lived in some of the most beautiful places on the planet. And I can now say, having made a really surprising choice to move back home to the place where I grew up, that the only difference between this picture and the one I just showed you is a story. And that the stories we tell ourselves have the profound power to shape our experience of our reality. And that in my 20s, the observation that I made, that this was a flat cornfield, was quickly followed by the story that this place was ugly, this place was boring, this place was not any place that I wanted to be living, and that I was moving out west. And when I came back home again 13 years later, I realized that my story had changed. and that this was still a place of flat cornfields. But there was so much more to it than that, and that when I changed my story, I changed my experience of living there. And this also has taught me another really important lesson, which is that if you want to reduce your stress in your life, focus on what fulfills you, not what makes you happy. This is so counterintuitive to what we're told often today. There are so many things that emphasize happiness. But Dr. Roy Baumeister has done some really interesting research. He looked at parents, and especially parents of small children, and the level of happiness versus the level of fulfillment that they experienced. And what he found was that parents of small children were way less happy than the average person, but they were also way more fulfilled. And reading this study helps us understand that there really is a difference between the two. Happiness is not the same as fulfillment. And when we focus on happiness, we often do it to the detriment of our fulfillment. But that when we focus on fulfillment instead, we often may find that happiness really doesn't matter as much as we thought it did. Or that we might find that we find happiness in places we never would have even expected. And so the final shift that I want to talk about in this video is to recognize the role that adversity serves in your life. When I first started practicing yoga and meditation, I saw the symbol of the lotus blossom. You may have come across it as well. And I just remember thinking, it's so perfect. It's so beautiful. It's so serene. This must be what it's like when you finally practice enough yoga or meditation to feel that sense of inner peace in your life. It just must be as beautiful as this lotus blossom. And then when I dove into Buddhism a little more deeply, I learned about a saying that they have: no mud, no lotus. And this helped me to realize that the reason that the lotus blossom is a symbol that it is because there is this understanding in Buddhism and in a lot of Eastern religions that without the muck, without the mud, without all that junk that we have to go through, we do not get the lotus blossom. That they are connected, that they are part of the same system, that we cannot have one without the other, and that in fact, maybe when we have adversity in our life, it actually gives us the opportunity to experience more inner peace by learning and growing and experiencing things that happiness just cannot teach us. And so this adversity in its own way becomes beautiful when we learn to see it from a new perspective. To wrap up, I'd just like to emphasize these final 4 points that we've talked about. Stress is a natural response to life's challenges, and that your parasympathetic nervous system can help your body feel more relaxed when you engage it. That your perspective affects your body's actual physical response to stress, and that in order to feel more peace and to live from that still axis in the center of that revolving wheel, you can start by noticing your stories, seeking fulfillment instead of happiness, and appreciating the role that adversity serves in your life. I'd like to thank you so much for joining me for this video. I would love to hear your thoughts and your stories. Of course, if you have any questions, you can always email me. And if you'd like to find more helpful resources like articles, other videos, or books that I recommend, you can always, again, visit my website, especially the resources page. You can follow me on Facebook or Instagram, and I hope you'll join me again next month when I present a video on the many paths to mindfulness. Thank you very much.